The Connector Next Door is your invitation to meet the natural connectors all around us. They represent the everyday event planners who are energizing their communities every single day. Their stories are familiar, fun, and full of charm. Your host, Lisa Garrow, is a lifelong event planner and has been a connection strategy coach for over a decade. She knows events can become energized connecting points where communities can gather and grow. Let's listen in as she strikes up a conversation with today's Connector Next Door.
Ashley Tedham has leaned into her life with courage and has become a leader who embraces the fear factor in her leadership. Ashley's a native Calgarian with a passion for international and community development. Over the last 15 years, Ashley has worked with various international organizations in Sierra Leone, Canada, and Switzerland, including the Canadian International Development Agency, the Permanent Mission of the Republic of Korea to the United Nations and the World Trade Organization, and the World Meteorological Association. In 2016, Ashley returned to Calgary and became the Executive Director of the Duke of Edinburgh's International Award. In 2021, Ashley took on a new role with Benevity, acting as their Director of Global Operations and Foundation Partnerships. Ashley's a passionate volunteer and currently sits on the board of Cause Canada and Making Changes Association. In our conversation today, Ashley shares how to truly connect with ourselves, our teams, and the opportunities that arise, we must be honest about who we are, clear about where our boundaries lie, and willing to embrace that fear factor in every step. Welcome back to the Connector Next Door and to another special conversation with a I love calling you a longtime friend, Ashley, because we've known each other for a long time and there have been many different iterations of our friendship, all the way to, I think, my daughter doggy sat for you or
Yep.
cat sat for you a few years back. So kind of everything and anything, but we've reconnected recently. And I just love not just your energy, but just your love for life. You just show up so authentically and so ready to give and so ready to have conversations like this. So thank you so much for taking the time to be here today.
Oh, it's my pleasure and honor to be with you today, Lisa.
We were chatting about where you've been in the last little while, but we'll get to sort of how you're living your life and how you're living out your passion through your work. But where I love to start is always where, for me, it's so important when we're talking about connection that we get different perspectives. We look at what does connection look like, not just in our own world or in our own bubble, but for you, when you look at connection in your life, how does it show up for you? And what does it mean to you? Maybe the word, what does the word connection mean to you?
Oh, that's a good one. I think for me, connection is about using vulnerability to build trust. I really think that's what connection is. And on different levels, like it can be in your personal life, connecting with your spouse or your children or your best friends, kind of peeling back the layers of the exterior for a deeper, richer understanding of one another, which I believe is like the foundation for trust building. But also, it, like for me, there's almost to a fault, like there's no difference in how I connect with people outside of my personal life. Rightly or wrongly, I think I connect and value the connection with people in my professional network, or even just at a coffee shop, almost in very similar ways. I think connection is just, coming together on a very human level, which I think is all about vulnerability.
And when you say vulnerability, I think there's always that tendency for people, even people listening today, that we gloss over a word because we've heard it so much, or we're like, we actually don't know what that can look like for us. And I love how you're talking about peeling back the layers and not
Mm-hmm.
just of the people in our lives, whether we're working with them or are married
Mm-hmm.
to them.
Yeah.
But when you're talking about peeling back the layers to build connection, that can be, I guess that is the definition of vulnerable, is that you do feel
Mm-hmm.
like it could potentially be unsafe, or it could be something
Mm-hmm.
that people will take advantage of. Or
Yeah.
what is that peeling back of the layers where you found that to be essential to connection for you?
That's a good question. I think um, for for me, it's almost like in order to be vulnerable, um, you have to be able to um, like show up in a brave way in front of people. So what I mean by that too is actually there's a great book. I think it's called Radical Candor.
Mm,
Um, and and it's this different way of showing up with people um, that requires a certain level of kindness, but also clarity and honesty. Um, and I think that is what is 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 missing in our world, generally speaking, especially in this very modern world, is like the rawness and the honesty of who someone really is and how they really feel. Um, I have a tendency to overshare, which which is, you know, sometimes how I show up in terms of being vulnerable. Like, you know, whether it's um, you know, showing up to a meeting and you're just totally stressed and not in a great place, and you just say, "Hey, I just want I just want to call it out. I'm not showing up as my best self today." And sometimes I share why, you know, like
mm,
just had a really rough morning at home, or really not feeling good, or you know, I just read something that was really upsetting. And I think more times than not, it's always paid off for me in terms of the depth of relationships, or the depth that my relationships kind of benefit from or end up going to. It just creates a richness in that relationship by kind of showing up emotionally naked. Do you know what I mean?
totally, I get it. It's so funny. I'm going to tell a funny story about my aunt. I was in BC in college, and I brought a bunch of my college friends over for a barbecue at their house. And my aunt, so beautiful, so open, so vulnerable, so in love with life too. And she always loved to have a laugh. And she told this story of how she was running into a meeting and she was so late. She takes her coat off and she's only wearing her slip. All of my friends are just having this laugh, and it was just such a beautiful thing that she could not only laugh at herself but just say, "This is me."
Yeah,
You know, maybe
yeah.
put her coat back on. But I'll never forget that story, because for me, I grew up where there was a lot of maintaining an image,
Mm-hmm.
maintaining a
Mm-hmm.
way that I can show up in the world and be accepted. You get to a point, I remember there was a course I went to, and there was a lot of, I call them secrets, but it was really more just things that we hide, the mask we wear.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember driving home from one of the sessions that we had, and the song on the radio was Holly Cole's Onion Girl. And
Mm-hmm.
it's okay, actually. I'm still
Mm-hmm.
here. I'm still
Yeah.
driving my car. I'm going home to see my girls. Everything's going to
Mm-hmm.
be okay eventually. In that vulnerability, that you're looking around and thinking, the world didn't blow up.
Yeah.
An incredible space. I love
Yeah.
how you're defining connection, because it doesn't leave us vulnerable and, like you said, naked to the world. It actually creates connection with others
Yeah.
that are brave enough to go there, or in
Yeah.
for whatever reason are there in their lives too.
Yeah. Yeah. It like unblocks things. Like for me, it's
Mhm.
uh sometimes when, because I'm very nerdy and kind of goofy, and you know, like I remember so many times just, you know, getting up in, whether it was like a big group of people and you're like public speaking, and you just or even recently on a big team meeting, I accidentally, um, without explaining the whole thing, I accidentally like essentially said, to everybody, said, oh, we've been meeting virtually for so long, it'll be good to get together and, give each other a hug and this kind of thing. And there was a whole bunch of Europeans coming over from the team. And I said, and, whether it's, I was thinking about the way that, the French or, Western Europe, greets each other with the kisses on the cheek. And I just blurted out, yeah, I welcome hugs, French kisses, whatever, whatever makes you feel more comfortable. And somebody, somebody just popped up at like, here's this director of global inviting, I don't know, 50 plus people to French kiss her. And one of my teammates was like, Ashley, I don't know if you really wanted to say it that way. And it didn't even register to me at the time. And I went, oh my gosh. And I started laughing. Everybody started laughing. And, it became this like, this connecting thing where like Ashley totally embarrassed herself. But like everybody on the call was way more warm to each other upon greeting. I mean, they didn't all French kiss each other, thank God. But it like unblocked something,
Yes.
It's like, oh, she's a goofball and like just like me, or even more goofier than me. And so I don't have to pretend to be something that I'm not,
Mm-hmm.
and it kind of like, even if there's, stuff going on in people's lives, if you're, I often ask my team on like a Monday morning to be like, okay, out of 10 on a professional level, where are you on a personal level, and generally like out of 10 being like the best you've ever been and 1 being the worst you've ever been. And like, they don't have to tell me why they're a 5 or a 10 or what, a 2, but it's almost like creating space for people to just be like, this is the truth about where I'm at today. They can just like, okay, I've said it, I put it aside, she knows, I know, and now we can move on,
And I think
Yeah.
sometimes we take ourselves so seriously. I think we had this
Yeah.
conversation over coffee
Yeah.
where it does keep things locked in if we are paying so much attention
Mm-hmm.
to how we are going to be received, how we're going
Mm-hmm.
to dress in a certain way or talk in a certain
Mm-hmm.
way or show up to our teams in a certain way. There is something off, definitely about working with excellence. But when we
Mm-hmm.
balance that with being real and authentic and really truly wanting to connect, I believe it does change the
Mm-hmm.
game. And it opens
Mm-hmm.
up all sorts of other opportunities, probably that weren't there in the first place.
Yeah. Because you know what? Um, creativity and innovation comes from it like it requires the courage to fail, right? Like by definition, you can't try something really new and novel without having that fear factor. And if everybody's just trying to like save face and show up in this polished way, then they're never gonna be comfortable to lean into that fear, right? They're like, no, no, no,
Mhm.
I need to show up in the way I think I'm supposed to show up instead of thinking outside the box. So I think especially in any type of leadership, whether it's like you're a parent or a people leader at work, um, or a political leader, it's like allow the people around you to lean into the fear and and that's like the vulnerability part, like the risk of failure, just look goofy, mess up, because we all do anyways, even if you continued pretending to be perfect, because you might just invite your whole team to French kiss you accidentally. You know what I mean?
And that would be a little scary if they all came off the plane and that was the
Right.
reality.
I was
Talk
prepared for
about
some
fear
awkward
factor.
greetings. Yeah.
I
It
love
didn't
that.
happen, thank God.
That is so hilarious. And I love how you use the word fear factor and again, sort of the buzzword about failure. And I think we misunderstand what failure looks like and what that leads us to. But when we talk about fear factor, it does become entertaining when it's the show, but when it's our own lives, I think when we sort of face the fear and do it anyway. That's been the story of my life too, where you kind of lean in and there is a certain point of fear, not danger necessarily. And I'm not going to jump
Yeah.
off a cliff. It's not meant to harm myself or others. But if you're feeling the fear, there usually is a little point or pearl of passion in that, where it's like that's where the refining is happening. And that's where we get really, I think, energized around what truly we're meant to do in the world and how we can contribute. That's what I see in your life, is that you have taken on some really big challenges professionally. You've taken teams on a journey of growth. You've allowed yourself to lean in, and I'm guessing, and I don't know that I heard the word fear out of your mouth, but where you're just facing down things that just in some people's minds and hearts, this is insurmountable. And when you talk about innovation, to kind of be in both of those spaces at the same time, where you're allowing yourself to lead and speak into the projects that you're working on or the teams that you're leading, while at the same time sort of backing a little bit off so that people have that room to grow and feel their own fear and do it anyway as well. Can you share with us a little bit of your leadership journey? What brought you to this place where this has become so much a part of who you are?
I think I think it was actually, fumbling through my youth, and realizing, you could be successful without having it all figured out, and just by leaning into the opportunities that were the unknown, like really the unfamiliar, the unknown, the exciting. Like I honestly think I learned a lot from, like, I remember being 24 and being accepted to do this internship in Sierra Leone, and I, my family thought I had lost my mind. My mom said, "I don't know if you've Googled Sierra Leone recently, but what pops up doesn't make a mother feel very confident in sending her 24-year-old over there." And it was just after the Civil War, and it was really scary. But there was this, like, for the first time, I think, in my life, I had this, like, there was like a piece about the fear. I was petrified, terrified, because I had no idea what I was going into. But it was like, there was this, like, deeply rooted almost voice that was like, it'll be okay. This is meant for you. This opportunity is meant for you. This opportunity is one of growth, right? And and I feel like I've kind of learned over the years to kind of hone in on that feeling, the mixture between that trepidation and peace. Like, I feel like I can't breathe, but also I have no choice. I must do this. I'm sure there's like a nerdy quote from Lord of the Rings where you're like, this is like what I have to do. And it's a bit like from the Alchemist, the book The Alchemist. They talk a lot about that too, like listening to that, your heart, right? Like that beating of your heart. You can't silence your heart. Like you can pretend that you're being courageous, you can do all the right things, but you can lie to the world, but you can't lie to yourself. And so all this is to say that, like, I've really tried to show up as a leader in different ways. And again, I'm still relatively new at being like a people leader. I've only really done it for, I don't know, like 7 years. And so I'm still learning all the time. But what I have realized is that when you show up for your teams in ways that you can get into some of their emotional complexity and help them wrestle it down. Something that I think a lot of leaders don't have time for or not interested in, right? Because it does require you to get into the weeds and connect with people, especially if you're not a huge fan of people. like like, there are people out there that's like, I just don't really love people, and that is cool. Like, that's fine. But and luckily enough for me, like I am driven by connecting with people, learning like how can we help unblock some things for them to be their best self, because there's so much they can do. I think that's what really gets me fired up as a leader, is like, how can I contribute to helping this individual feel just a little bit more brave, and just push themselves just that little bit more. And I have found in creating opportunity to do that with people, you're really helping yourself and the team at large, because you're just unlocking all of these secret powers and opportunities for growth that otherwise would just be missed entirely. And that takes work. It takes time. It takes emotional commitment, and it's exhausting. But it is so worthwhile. And I do think if you are in the game, in the space of building teams and especially innovative teams, you have to be willing to go there with people.
Even the idea of an innovative team has so many personalities. When we say join our innovative team, and I think what we forget sometimes is that within that category, everyone's still going to be showing up with their own stories, their own barriers, their own feeling of maybe inadequacies or the fears that hold them back. Yeah. And so we can't just paint everyone with a brush and say, now let's all be innovative, or let's all just get creative. And I think what you are showing in the fear factor, or feeling that trepidation and doing the work, sometimes that heartbeat, we just have to listen for it. But when you attune yourself to it, it almost drowns out all the other things that I think get us gummed up in living our dreams, or going for a goal, or trying something new, or know that that is an area that we can be feeding into. When you can hear the heartbeat of what you're trying to accomplish, or who you are, more so than anything else. I think we start to step in and just say, I can't unhear that. It's important. What is the work that you're doing today? How is all of this and the learning that you've done and the leadership that you've had over this 7-8 years? It does sound like the work that you're doing today is very much heart-centered for you, that you can hear the heartbeat in what you're doing today.
Yeah, I've reflected on this a lot in the last 3 years. I've been in this kind of global director role with Benevity for 3 years, and various title changes, but with Benevity for 3 years. And I do have to remind myself, because everybody has hard days at work, no matter how much they love their job. I have to remind myself how lucky I am to have a job that feeds you on that deep level. And it hasn't been straightforward. And it took me, 15, 20 years to get here. But I do look back often, and it's not lost on me that every scary thing that I've done really has set me up for this opportunity, like really well. And it's almost like I couldn't have written it better, which has given me a lot of confidence in kind of what we're trying to do at work. And what that is a combination of, on a very global level, do our best to, Benevity says to spread goodness, but I think it's more about allowing or creating space for people to lean in and participate in community development, in healing of individuals, and of really like throwing out an international helping hand in ways that they otherwise couldn't, because there's this ecosystem that Benevity has created that allows people to just be a part of this philanthropic conversation on many levels, not just a corporate one, but an individual one. Like, companies are allowing their employees to have a say in the direction of their corporate social investments. And I think that's really beautiful. And it's messy. Like, it's really messy, right? Because the world is complex, and And there's so much variation in opinions and perspectives on the personal level, but also the political level, right? So I think what is so fascinating about the work that I'm doing is, or I get to be a part of, is that we're creating this, like, as much as you can humanly possibly do, an agnostic space that allows people to support what they believe in, with the caveat of, as long as it's legally allowed, as long as it's legally allowed, de-risking it for people so that they can, like, a lot of the members of my team are focused on creating opportunities globally. But then another element is protecting those opportunities so that by leaning in, you're not actually exposing yourself to, unknown risk, whether it's to yourself, whether it's to the cause, the nonprofit organization, the corporate client, or Benevity. And so it's a bit of a dance, right? Because you can't throw open the floodgates and just allow everything, but you also want to allow as much as you humanly possibly can to create equity while just, protecting one another. And, the richness, I'm sure you can imagine the richness of the conversations that we get to have day to day, where we are challenged to check our bias at the door, to push beyond what kind of imagery we saw in the news the night before, and say, okay, all of that aside, what do we do? What's the right thing to do? Right? Mm-hmm. What's the responsible thing to do? And it's not as always as straightforward as you would think. And in there is, like, I think, the real opportunity. And there's a lot of scary things we run into. I feel scared a lot at work because I don't want to get it wrong. And the last thing I want to do is ever hurt someone in any sort of way. And there's so much you can't control, but the fact that we get to be a part of that, the potential impact, like having that impact, a global one, like that was always my dream. Like, how can I have the biggest possible impact in the most positive way possible?
Thanks for sharing that, because I think there are a lot of people out there, and anyone planning or promoting their own events often are in that position where you're innovating, you're choosing something, you are balancing the risk with that reward of some kind, whatever it is you're sort of putting out there into the world. And we're so busy planning, we're so busy putting all the things together that sometimes it's that understanding that we have to, in some cases, lean in and explore what the risks could be and be very open and honest about that. At the same time saying these are areas where we can start to innovate. The both and I love how you're describing the dance, because if we forget the dance and we forget that we have to dip our toes into both and that ultimately there is a responsibility for the ones that are both participating in your case and also the recipients of that action or that investment, there are pieces of that I think as planners we can really start to understand how, if we're trying to do bigger things, it's not just about doing that event that was happening down the road, or we really want to have that impact with our campaign, but it's looking at our unique situation and saying, how can we invest in the world we know, in the world that we have influence on?
In the event space, like, I'm sure you asked this question, what is the goal of this event, right? Like, what do you want from this? Is it to make the most money possible? Or is it to build meaningful connection? Or is it to create a space for innovation? Or, it's the same thing with our clients. It's like, everyone has a different answer. Like, what is the goal of your giving program? Some will say equity. Some will say global reach. Some will say, creating tax effective opportunities for where our employees are. It really can look so different. Yeah.
So with your role and everything that you've learned, and I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit,
sure.
Just a little bit. So if we were to take your, I'll say your perspective of connection into the planning world, and the people that are listening to this today are planners. I know that you have planned your share of events, and that means probably dozens and dozens and maybe hundreds. But when you think of yourself and where you are today, and yes, you haven't been that one hit wonder, and you haven't been that overnight success, and it has taken years to learn and to lean into who you are today. But what could people that are listening to this today and they're inspired by this idea of, even if we feel afraid, even if we feel like maybe we don't have everything it's going to take to do something, how can we be making choices towards innovative events, finding solutions that might be out of the box, but also balancing that with that responsibility we have?
So good. Okay. So I would say, I think a lot of times, I don't know, we come to these places like the hard decision making, right? Because there's so much decision making in event planning. There's so much decision making, like big decisions, small. I think, there's always competing priorities. Because what I'm trying to say is there's like two things can be true at the same time. And you would need, like, let's say in the event space, because we've been there together.
Yes,
we have we have to put on this huge event, and we have no money.
Bum, bum, bum.
And those two things are true at the same time, and they don't help one another. What do you do? What do you do with that? Where are the opportunities? Where can we be brave? What are we willing to risk? What are we not willing to risk? I think that's a huge thing, actually. Like, I kind of talked myself into the answer there, because you can start with, like, what's the objective? That's great. But, like, in order to get this objective, what are we not willing to do? And then by creating the boundaries, then I think it becomes a little easier. Like, you kind of almost have to work yourself back from worst case scenario.
You give yourself a lot of time, folks. So
yeah,
it's a long road to walk yourself back.
Yeah, but it really is, like, in every way. It's like, what is the worst possible thing that could happen? And what can we do to make sure that doesn't happen, while not taking away from the opportunities we have? So it's like, in my space, it's like, okay, what don't we want to happen? Well, we don't want charitable dollars being misused. We don't want charitable dollars falling into the hands of terrorists. Okay, what can we do to prevent that? And then also, at the same time, we don't want to overdo the protective, the being overprotective, because then we're limiting opportunity, right? So it's like, it's almost like, I mean, these are big questions, but it's like, if somebody thinks an organization is funding terror, doing something offside with corporate, with charitable dollars, versus they've been proven to, and do you just, every time you suspect that something could be bad, you shut it down? And if not, where does that leave you? And this is, like, complex. This is like a 2-hour discussion, but if you take that and make it smaller, it's like, okay, what don't we want with an event? Well, we don't want to be in a deficit, or we don't want there to be, I don't know, what's the worst thing that's ever happened at one of your events?
I think sometimes it's the one where there's a culmination of problems that sort of all layer on top of each other, and like, okay, here we are today. Okay, so we are unpacking 10 things. It's just,
exactly that. It's just like, creating, like, this is our boundary, and anything else is possible. So let's dream within those boundaries.
Totally. And I call them non-negotiables because when we
Yeah.
start to understand, because then they could be positive or negative,
Mm.
there are things that I think as we get older, and I feel like I've been around this block so many times that there are even positive non-negotiables for me. I have adopted three words for myself. They are brilliant, playful, wise, and they've kind of folded into what Candy's, we call them culture commitments here, are. And I, before the holiday, I thought, well, what if I took on projects that went through this filter that I need to make sure that I am able, and when I say brilliance, it's shedding light on things, sharing information, giving, I'm not going to be in your boat, but I can help your boat get to where it needs to go. Playful, something that I'm a playful person, something where I can laugh, where I feel like even if I'm creating activations, I feel playful. And then the
Yeah.
wisdom part is that maybe I don't have a degree, maybe I don't have exactly those
Mm.
right credentials, but I have that experience from
Hmm.
where I've been that I have, again, kind of folded in my world, folded it into the work that I do so
Hmm.
that I can show up with wisdom. And
Hmm.
if those things are in place, then I feel like that's a beautiful space for me to work. And
Hmm.
it, for anyone listening to this, and you may have, maybe it's your mission statement, maybe it's your vision, board that you've put together with your team, maybe it's something that you're like, this is the heartbeat of us. This is the heartbeat of our organization. Like at Benevity, there's a very clear, even from the outside, heartbeat of why you exist. And then
Hmm.
for us as individuals to lean in and say, where am I going to do my best work? And
Yeah.
when you're talking about really giving yourself the time and the space to say, where do we not want to go? But then also recognizing the opportunities in that. That is once we master that and allow ourselves to have both and, I think that's such a
Hmm.
beautiful encouragement for people listening.
Yeah. And I was just thinking as you were talking, one thing that just dawned on me is I think as leaders, there's a tendency to like weigh carry the pressure. And so when you feel the pressure and the weight of it, you have a tendency to be like, oh, I have these decisions to make. And
Hmm.
actually, I think what I have found to be more effective is leading rather with curiosity, so that instead of making the decisions, you're asking the questions that need to be asked,
Mm.
right? That maybe because of the wisdom you've collected over the years, you've learned what questions to ask so that you don't make the same mistakes, right? Or
Mm.
you're going into it with a little bit more, you're creating, going back to what we were talking about, creating that opportunity for growth, innovation, for allowing people to be vulnerable. Because if you're a leader that's just busy making decisions, then
Mm.
nobody else gets that. Nobody, then you're just like actually ignoring all the other superpowers in the room that could actually help you harness a better event or a better team or a better outcome. Our job as leaders is to ask the questions and lead with curiosity.
Hmm.
What could this event look like? What could we do? What would impact the budget? What would impact the connection? How could we look at this differently? And what is the worst that could happen
Hmm.
if we get it wrong? Like that, I think, like, I don't know how many times a day, because I have a lot of perfectionists on my team. And I don't know how many times a day they're like, yeah, I just don't want to get it wrong. And I'm like, and so what if you do? What's the
Hmm.
worst thing? And 9 times out of 10, the worst possible thing isn't that bad. Like we can recover, you
Hmm.
know? So why not give it a chance, you know? Let's go there for a minute.
I know, exactly. And I love, and maybe that's a beautiful place for us to wrap
Mm.
this conversation because when you were saying, I think it was way at the beginning of this conversation, but when you're talking about unlocking or freeing people up, or as a leader, how we can be that catalyst to give people space, where they can explore and innovate and create and understand they're capable of it. And we're both moms. And I think if we were
Mm.
to raise our kids where we made every decision for them, not only is that exhausting for us as mothers, but I think there
Yeah.
also would be that missed opportunity for our kids to really see what they're capable of. And I think for ourselves too, that we can lean into the support of others. And it's amazing how many, and you probably see that on your team too, where you kind of get to a place where you're asking the question, you might have some ideas around it, but then you're surprised by what's actually emerging from your team. And that's, I believe that's such a beautiful connection space. So beautiful. Love having this conversation, and I'm sure we'll have more to come.
Hope so.
Are you open if people wanted to continue the conversation with you? Where could they get a hold of you? And how can they learn more about Benevity too? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, open, absolutely 100%. You know, I'm on LinkedIn. I am happy to even share my work email, but LinkedIn is a great place to start. And Benevity has a website. You just have to Google it. You know, Benevity, I think it's benevity.com, pretty sure. Haven't Googled it for a while. Get back to you on that. And but yeah, I mean, if there's more information that I can personally share, whether it's about my own journey or about Benevity, I'm very happy to do that.
Awesome.
Anytime.
Thank you so much, Ashley. So much fun to chat with you and to learn more about where this has all come from. And I am so glad that we're friends and that there's this opportunity to grow together as well as we both innovate and see what's possible in the future.
Well, I appreciate it. Learned a lot already from you, and I have a lot more to learn. So thanks for giving me this space to be creative.
The Connector Next Door podcast is produced by Candy Event Consulting, where everyday event planners and their teams gain clarity, get connected, and grow in confidence. Subscribe at www.candyconsulting.ca to hear visits with everyday event planners who are putting connections first.